After 6 weeks into our work together, one way I was able to get past Deborah's defenses was through touch. There's a presence, a caring, and a quality of contact that can be expressed powerfully from one body to another. It's something that words simply cannot do. While other forms of body work had not been effective with her in the past, I had the advantage of building a relationship with her before making physical contact. In addition, rather than something I was simply doing to her, I invited her participation by guiding her through various breathing and body awareness practices. For example, I drew her attention to her anal sphincter and encouraged her to play with relaxing and tightening it. Said anal sphincter. But just notice what's happening in the room as everybody starts to lower their awareness. You know, almost always when anyone's feeling anxiety, the sphincter is contracted. And this practice is very grounding. Simply engaging the muscles and relaxing or pushing outward has a profound effect on decreasing the body's tension and anxiety. It also drew Deborah's attention downward into her body and away from her head. In addition to doing this kind of practice, during one session, I began to use my training in acupressure. By making a certain kind of contact with the Chinese medicine system of the meridians, it is possible to release stuck emotional patterns. By accessing the gallbladder and liver meridians, I was able to release layers of anger and frustration that had been festering inside of Deborah. These meridians end at the feet, and as I made contact with Deborah's, I could both feel and watch a part of her descending from her head and filling out more of her body. I saw this through the fullness of breath that was entering her torso and by a slowing down of the pace of her breathing. I could also see waves of muscle tension relax in her face, neck, and shoulders. Even her forearms and hands released from the suggestion of fists into more open palms. A silence and a stillness entered the room while I was doing this. It was as if the war that had been going on inside of Deborah found détente, a moment of peace. Through the connection of our bodies, the presence that I was using within myself could make contact with the presence within Deborah and call it forward. I've come to believe that as we grow into fuller embodiment, we can enter into a state of grace. And as I watched and felt Deborah descend more fully into her body, grace is what we experienced in the room. It was something timeless and magical. I see my role with Deborah as a midwife to her own presence within herself. I believe it was Deborah's soul that was entering into her body that day. And as a result, in that moment, life was fulfilling its promise. In fact, after a full year of being tortured by a continuous migraine, Deborah had her first experience of relief. The migraine remitted for 2 months. While I believe the experience of relief from pain was an important step in our work together, what I'd offered Deborah that day was merely a band-aid to a symptom, rather than a change in the source of the problem. I knew the relief would be temporary because that session did not change Deborah's relationship with herself or the years of organizing her body into a headache. My work with Deborah was ultimately about helping her to learn how to relieve the migraine for herself. And towards that end, the vacation from pain gave us an opportunity to learn more about Deborah's history. Although the factual details took some time to come out, the first clue was that she was stalked. All through high school and later on in her 20s, she had someone who was obsessed with her, a boy she had dated briefly at the age of 14. When she had resisted his advances, he sent her dead animals and bags of feces to her doorstep. He would follow her around and send both love and hate letters to her, and for one reason or another, it was never stopped. Later on, Deborah revealed that her car and home had been vandalized by other teenagers many times during high school. One of the teenagers' families offered Deborah $10,000 as a kind of restitution, but it was not long afterward that she discovered her father had stolen that money to pay for his spending addiction. Eventually, she told me she'd been date raped. As a result of this information, I began to understand her migraine as a symptom of trauma. At this point, I have to offer a grateful acknowledgement to Stanley Kellerman, founder of formative psychology and a powerful force in the field of somatics. It is within the framework of this discipline that much of my work with Deborah took place. Contrary to how most of us view ourselves, Kelman believes that human beings are dynamic creatures, always in the process of forming. We are breathing, throbbing, tensing, and flowing organisms. From the viewpoint of this theory, one could say that we're really more aptly conceived of as human becomings rather than human beings. So the central question of this paradigm is, how are we forming ourselves? I'd asked Deborah one day, how do you do the migraine? What, she scoffed? I don't make this happen. It's just something that happens to me. She gave me a look of disdain as if the premise of that question was the most ridiculous thing she'd ever heard. But the one sentence of her response revealed the crux of the problem. Deborah saw the experience of pain in her head as something that randomly happened to her, rather than something she had any participation in. She saw no part of her bodily organization as being at cause in the experience of her migraine. So I followed her response with an inquiry. Without overdoing it, can you intensify the migraine? Can you make it worse? She sat with my question for a moment, as if wondering whether to entertain my craziness. And then she closed her eyes and started to lift her shoulders inward and upward. Her face crinkled up, an entire sea of musculature from her chest, shoulders, and neck waved upward. It was like looking at highway gridlock. Then she looked at me with that scorn she often had, feeling more uncomfortable than she'd been. Okay, I said, you can stop. Now, how did you do that? And then the revelation dawned on her. There was some way that she was forming herself into the headache. She said, I don't know, I just tightened. But how did you tighten? I challenged her. Where in your body did you do that? I tightened my shoulders, bringing them closer together, squeezing on my neck, and I furrowed my brow. Great, I said. So there's an overall movement in and up. Now, can you lessen the intensity? Can you take it down a notch? She sat with my question for a minute, and then slowly, her shoulders dropped, and the crinkles in her face began to relax. Her breathing slowed, and shortly, she opened her eyes. Okay, I said, what did you do? Again, she responded with, I don't know, I just sort of relaxed. But how in your body did you relax? I pressed her. Well, my breathing slowed down, my shoulders went out and down, and something opened in my neck. We did this type of exercise numerous times over many sessions, and slowly, Deborah started to realize that if she could form herself into a migraine, then she might be able to form herself out of one.